Welcome to the Salt Strong Podcast, disrupting fishing entertainment as you know it. Prepare to laugh. Prepare to get to know fishing legends in a whole new and unfiltered way. And on occasion, you might even learn a thing or two about fishing. Here's your host, Joe Simons. Like diamonds.
Hello, Salt Strong Nation. Joe Simons. Like diamonds, we are back. Got quite a crew here. Probably got one of the smartest people we've ever had on the podcast, just looking at the PhD and all these doctorates and all these things behind his name. And we're going to be talking about snook tagging. We're going to be talking about snook behavior. Some really cool stuff, just talking offline with Charlie, was how far some of these snook are moving north in Alabama, South Carolina, maybe even North Carolina before we know it. It's that's pretty wild. So first and foremost, welcome to the show, Charlie.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. It's great to be here. And thank you for all the accolades. I'm not sure I'm worthy, but we'll do my best.
So real quick, what's the background? What are you doing now? Who are you working for?
So I guess a brief history of myself. I grew up in North Alabama. I did my PhD at University of South Alabama, working at the Dauphin Island Sea Lab off the coast of Alabama. Cool. I was there when Deepwater Horizon oil rig blew up. And so I worked on that, moved to LSU and did some work on oil spill research. And about 2016, I got the job here at University of Florida at the Nature Coast Biological Station, which is a brand new marine lab at the time in Cedar Key, Florida. So it was pretty cool to be able to come into a new marine station. People don't build marine labs anymore. They've all been there forever. So that was a great draw to be able to come in and have a say on, the focus and the direction of a new lab from scratch. So I'm an estuarine ecologist. So I actually study a little bit of everything, plants and their interactions with animals, how it affects the ecology of the whole system. But the reason I'm in this field to begin with is because I love fishing, and I always have.
Love it. Now you're getting to tag common snook and follow them around, see what they're doing, see what they're eating. And just so you guys know, offline, he basically told us exactly where every big snook is in the state of Florida. So that's for insiders only. So you know what? If you're not an insider, you're not going to know any of this stuff. So well, cool. I'm excited to talk about this and the whole tagging part. And you guys are doing it through some kind of acoustic tagging. We'll talk about that. It's fascinating to see what these snook are doing, both going offshore and going way up into springs and even going up north. Pretty cool. So also, of course, if you're listening, I know a lot of our listeners / viewers are on YouTube. Some are on iTunes and Spotify. And so we also have a few more guests. So the ones you can't see, we got my brother Luke, we got Justin, head of tackle, and then Tony, our kayak pro. So guys, where do you want to begin? I got a question in general, and you don't have to, you're not speaking for FWC here, just to preface this, but how are snook doing in general, just the overall population? How do you guys, behind closed doors, are you saying, man, these things are in trouble, or they're making a pretty good recovery? How do snook look in general?
Yeah, so snook were in trouble about 2010. I'm guessing a lot of listeners to the show probably remember 2010 being a really cold winter. Iguanas falling out of the tree in South Florida and crazy stuff like that. But there were also big snook kills, and from my understanding, snook have bounced back pretty well from that. So well, in fact, that we're finding them in some abundance around Cedar Key, which is north of their historical distribution.
And as far as tracking them too, so you mentioned briefly that the center pin for you has been Cedar Key, and what range have you been tagging them, and then what range have you been seeing them? Are they doing a lot of north and south, or are they more going inland and offshore?
Yeah, so we've been tagging them around Cedar Key since about 2016 when I got there, working with Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, Caleb Pertlebaugh, and with myself and Mike Allen, who's the director of our station. This is a collaborative project, and we've had funding through the Fish and Wildlife Foundation for this, through the Swanee River Water Management District, and through Duke Energy Foundation. So thankful for all that to keep this work going. And so we've got receivers and tag fish out around Cedar Key, and mostly what we're finding is they'll go up the river, up the Swanee River, offshore on occasion. It seems like the ones that are around Cedar Key, around Halloween every year, they start moving into the coastal rivers or offshore. And then about this time of year, they'll start making their way back out to the seagrass beds and oyster reefs along the coast.
How do you become a volunteer to catch all the snook for the tagging stuff? Is that your job? Is that part of the perk?
So we catch them through a variety of methods. We do hook and line a little bit, especially on some of the offshore reefs. We went out with fishing guides on occasion. We electrofish in freshwater. Of course, you can't do that in saltwater. It doesn't work because of the conductivity. Electricity doesn't travel in saltwater. And then with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, they have a fisheries independent monitoring program in Cedar Key. So they have these huge 600-foot nets, and they have sites they go to every month. And so there's a good record going all the way back to 1999 of everything they catch, and that's how they manage the population.
That's like what we did, Luke, right? That one day with a big old 600-foot seine net.
And that's hard work too. That is no joke. Those nets.
You want to volunteer? You volunteered once.
Yeah, we volunteered one time for it. It was really neat to see how that happens. But that net, that 600 feet of net with relatively small mesh, I mean, it just catches so much, just dragging the water with all the weeds and everything. And it was a workout.
And
and you see a lot of cool stuff in it too. A lot of things that you wouldn't normally catch on a hook and line or in your cast net. So it's a really neat thing to see.
Yeah, and we're out there with those guys and gals, and I don't even know, we had gloves on the very beginning, and they're like, yeah, just dig your hands in there, and like we're throwing weeds out and jellyfish, catfish, it was nuts. And they're doing it like nothing's going on, like, oh yeah, you'll get busted up by a few catfish, maybe a little stingray. I'm like, what? Like, you guys aren't just like science nerds, like you guys are tough as nails. Like, that was hard work. Golly.
They have to be really careful because you can get back injuries, shoulder injuries. You get that net in a current, and it can pull you. Respect to those folks.
100%. And so you mentioned the offshore, so that's a wintertime thing, is what it sounds like from what you've been seeing. And
yeah, so some of them go offshore, and then some of the snook go up into the rivers. And this part of the world, there's a really high concentration of springs, and in fact, it's some of the highest density of springs in the whole world. And so there's groundwater coming out of those springs, constant temperature that they can use, much like a manatee would, to survive, these cold periods. So we found snook increasing in Cedar Key since about 2008. And I would say that because of their life history, that they go up the rivers, they seek this thermal refuge, they can probably survive some of the cold freezes that we still get. We've had some cold days the past month or two. And we have not had any reports of fish kills.
And so you're having resident snook up in these springs then, obviously, right? I mean, I know some are moving back and forth, but there's some that are just there year round now and they're used to it. And
yeah. And so it's interesting that some do seem to be hanging around these springs, and, you suspect that they're going to come out eventually. They've been known to spawn at the mouths of rivers further south. So we expect we're going to see them at some point. We've got receivers up and down the rivers. So I guess a little bit about our tagging procedure. We work with FWC on this, and we make an incision on the belly of the snook. We have about a 3-inch tag. We put up in there, suture them up, and that tag puts out an acoustic signal. And then we have receiver stations around that listens for that signal. And so whenever it hears it, then it says, okay, this is fish number 1208, blah, 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 right? And so we can keep track of it going up the river and then down the river. And so it's a pretty neat thing. And this is also, these receivers are part of a larger effort called ITAG. So there's receivers in the Suwannee River for Gulf sturgeon, which is threatened endangered species. And so they'll get our snook on their receivers, and we'll get their sturgeon, and we can share the data, and it's a good collaborative environment.
So cool. So what's the ultimate goal when you guys are going to get funding and grant money and all that stuff? What's the kind of the pitch with this?
Yeah,
Obviously, I'm interested as a fisherman. How do you guys position it?
Well, so I guess the pitch is that springs have for a while been in some trouble, right? There's a lot of people want that water from the aquifer, right? To suck water out of the ground. Mm-hmm. Municipalities for drinking water supply, agriculture. There's a lot of different demands on the water, and all those demands mean that there's less fresh water coming out of those springs, which is a thermal habitat during the wintertime for things like snook. So you want to protect the snook. So this information is really useful for folks like the Water Management District to set those minimum flows and levels and regulate the groundwater.
Interesting. And then the snook were just one of multiple species, like you guys are, assume, tracking manatees and other things that are using these springs then.
Well, if there are other groups that have tagged manatees with the same brand, Femco tags, then we'll pick it up on our receiver and we'll be able to share that information. We have not tagged any manatees or sturgeon. There's a group through USGS that studies sturgeon, but it's a good system to have in place. So, if we want to know about flounder or whatever, we can start tagging other things, and the system's there, and we'll know where they're going, what they're doing, different times of the year.
Too cool. What do you guys think, Justin, Tony?
I was going to say, do you feel that snook are more migratory than, let's say, redfish or trout or any of those other species? You find them moving more than the other species?
Yeah, definitely more than redfish. Redfish, I don't have any data on this locally, but redfish are fairly tolerant. Of course, you find them all the way up into the northern Gulf and North Carolina and around the area. Trout in the wintertime go up the marsh creeks, but they don't go as far. The interesting thing about snook is that they can tolerate both saltwater and freshwater, and so they can go back and forth into these areas. So they are able to withstand and move longer distances, even if it's offshore to inshore.
And some of these are going way up river, right? Like up into North Florida, Georgia area?
Yeah, so we've had some reports up the Santa Fe River, all the way up the Suwannee River, almost to the Georgia state line. So we've got some receivers at the junction of the Santa Fe and Suwannee River. So they do travel quite a ways on occasion. And you mentioned at the beginning snook being caught in some of these faraway places where you wouldn't expect them. We had a report from Mobile Bay, from Choctawhatchee Bay in Florida. There's been papers published recently on snook in South Carolina. So this seems to be a trend. Texas is another example. They're moving poleward along the Texas coast as well. So this seems to be a trend. We've seen it with mangroves. Red mangroves, black mangroves are all, black mangroves especially, they're all the way around the Gulf now. So when we think this is related to less hard freezes, and these organisms can survive in areas where they used to not be able to.
It's crazy to think you could maybe catch a snook in every Gulf state there.
Who knows? One day. Right now, reliably, I think folks catch them in Keaton Beach, Steinhatchee, but the catches are just occasional past that.
Yep.
I wanted to ask Can you guys hear me okay?
It's pretty low, but
I wanted to ask you, Dr. Charlie, just to put some numbers into perspective, what is the lower lethal level of snook? Just because we're talking about springs and we're talking about, water temps in that 72-degree range, what's that lower lethal range for snook that it starts getting a little dicey and they might get a little disoriented if they're not in their prime temperature range?
Yeah. So there have been various estimates done on that, and around 50 degrees, lower 50s. They first stop feeding, then they kind of lose their equilibrium, and then they'll die. One interesting aspect to that is what's the lower lethal limit for these snook that are moving north along the coast? It could be less. We don't know yet, but that's something we hope to tackle in the future. Pretty interesting question. We've actually had a student, Emma Pistol. She did the genetics on the snook around Cedar Key and in the Nature Coast area, compared that to Charlotte Harbor, South Florida, Tampa Bay, and found that genetically these fish are as different as the Gulf population is from the Atlantic population. And that's a pretty interesting finding because the FWC manages the Gulf and the Atlantic differently based on genetic stocks. So genetics could play a role, and who knows? Maybe the snook in this northern end of the range are a little more cold tolerant. We don't know, but that's something we hope to test in the future.
But these are all still common snook. You're just saying they've almost kind of evolved a little bit genetically. Yeah,
so that's right. They're all common snook. Are there enough genetic differences between the snook here and snook farther south to have those different cold tolerance? An interesting aspect of this, and we published a paper on this last year of snook expansion in the Cedar Key area. At first, it was the really big snook that moved in, and they moved in about 2008, 2012. They started getting established in Cedar Key, and these were huge individuals. Almost a meter. Between 3/4 of a meter to a meter long. And after that, we start seeing the smaller ones moving in until about the time I moved to Cedar Key in 2016, you could catch the really young of the year snook in the marshes. So what we think's happened is that the adults, big ones, moved in first, established a population, and then started reproducing. So.
And when you see them go offshore, how far off are you seeing them? I've done some scuba diving like down in Marco and saw them in like the 30 foot range. I'm just wondering how far out are you seeing them going out?
Right. So we've been out to 20 feet on average, and this part of the coast, they say it's about drops about a foot for every mile you go offshore. So it's a long, slow slope on this coast, and so we've seen them offshore on a few wrecks here and there at 20 to 25 feet deep, and some big aggregations of snook around those as well.
And so that's 20 miles too, just so they're that far out?
Yeah, roughly 15 miles, 20 miles, something like that.
And how long would it take for them to do that? Do you have those beacons throughout, or like, can you see if they start here at say Halloween, and are they that far out by winter?
Yeah. So the tags only tell us where they're at on the receivers that we put out. So if they get within half a kilometer of our receiver, it'll log that data for us. So it's not like like you may have seen on Discovery Channel where they're tagging sharks and they're sending up a GPS signal. That would be super cool. Would love to do that with tarpon, for example, that move up and down the coast. So if anybody has some money out there, we're gonna tag tarpon.
Kind of expensive, but like, do you have a general idea? I mean, does it take them months to go miles? I have no clue on how.
I don't think it takes months. I think maybe on the order of days to weeks. They could move from the offshore habitat or the mouth of the Swanee River to the Cedar Key area. They'll do that pretty quick. I'm pretty sure that based on our data so far, it's still a work in progress, this whole project, but some interesting trends so far.
That's cool.
So I think something important too we should mention just for the viewers and listeners is that, the regulations, like if someone does catch a snook in an area where they're not used to catching them, they should definitely read up on the regulations just so it doesn't, hurt the population. If they do catch something, go, well, I never caught this before. I'm just going to keep it. They have to follow the Gulf and Atlantic regulations.
So what if someone caught one on the border of Florida and Georgia on the Swanee River or whatever river around there? Is there any rule? What rule do you follow? Anybody know?
In the FWC page, I'm reading it here, like they have regulations that extend like in South Florida, like up into Kissimmee River and even Lake Okeechobee. So I'd be curious to see how the regulations change as the snook start moving.
Well, there's a spot here in Polk County where I am. If you guys are familiar with the state of Florida, Polk County is in the dead center, and there are quite a few snook caught every year in Polk County. They go up in the Peace River and either get stuck there, live there, whatever. And I don't know what the rule is. I personally have never caught one or kept one in Polk County, but I don't know that because it's not on either coast. It's just dead in the middle of the state. What you would if I guess you could legally keep it. What do you think? How does it read, Tony? No, you say no, Justin?
Well, no, I'm not sure about the regulation side of things, but I know that snook are Euryhaline species. They can live in 2 parts per thousand or less of saltwater, and that's basically freshwater. I mean, 0 would be freshwater. Saltwater could be 27, 28 to 33, 34. Is that right, Charlie? So to be in 2 parts with a little bit of salt, way, way out the river. I mean, snook can live in straight freshwater. Their exchange of using salt and, managing their metabolic rate and, functioning can be very, very low. So it makes sense for them to be way upriver and probably take resident. I mean, Charlie, you speak more to that with these fish that are heading way upriver, if a lot of them stay or if they're constantly frequently going back and forth throughout the season, I'm sure there's probably resident fish up where Joe's at.
That's right. Yeah, there are resident fish that stick around the springs. For how long? We heard some over the summer that were up there. At some point you figure they're going to go out and spawn at the mouths of the rivers. But, whenever they do, hopefully our receivers will catch them moving out. And so we'll get more information on that. How long do they stay in those freshwater areas versus saltwater? Great questions.
Have there been any data or trends or aha moments that kind of baffled you guys or maybe a little bit different than you thought was going to happen?
Yeah. So I think just the fact that we found them going up the river about Halloween was an aha moment, at least for me. We started 2016 tagging these snook and based on the FWC data, they're gone in the wintertime. So we thought, maybe they're moving farther south, but turns out they're moving into the rivers. So that was a pretty cool finding that, there's some built-in resilience to the ecosystem. They're for these fish just to move in and find some thermal refuge and stay warm over the winter.
And so very few, if any, are going south in the winter.
Well, so far, the ones we've tagged, we don't have a ton of receivers to the south. There's a group with the FWC working around Homosassa. I don't think they've heard any of our fish down that way, but it would be interesting, as time moves on, some fish move up to Cedar Key or vice versa.
I think something interesting to talk about is how their prey source changes as they head up the river. I mean, if you get into areas that are really, really fresh, they might not be targeting pinfish. I'm sure mullet could probably reside well up in a freshwater spring or estuary. But pilchards and small ladyfish and things are very salinity intolerant. So that range needs to be more of a sweet spot. I wonder how their food source will change when they get up into freshwater at certain times of the year.
And that's a great question. And we've got a group working through UF is looking at their food habits on the coast here in Cedar Key. And, it looks like they eat a fish primarily, cyanids, silver perch, pinfish, pigfish, maybe some trout, who knows. But then what happens when they move up into the river, into the freshwater ecosystem? They start eating the shell crackers and the bluegill and stump knocker and small bass. Who knows? It could be, it's a totally different ecosystem, different players. And then you start thinking about the thermal refuge. If everything's huddled in that one little bit of warm water and everything's right there, then you got more interactions. So maybe more potential for them to be eating each other.
Interesting. Are you guys doing dissections and checking out the stomachs, or is that a whole different part of FWC and the whole different studies?
So FWC has a project with there's a graduate student thesis right now working on that exact question. So findings to be determined at a later date. Cool.
We'll have to track that one. I would love to know just the number one bait, right? Everyone wants to know it.
One bait. That's what everybody wants to know.
Yeah. Probably going to be culprit worm for the freshwater stuff. We all know that.
They dominate bullfrog lures in salt water, so I'm sure they're probably just eating whatever they see scurrying around. On those tests, I'm just fascinated by those tests where the receivers pick them up just to see like how far they go and how fast they go. Have there been any that stand out as far as being like the sprinters where they get pinged one spot and then pretty shortly later they get pinged like a long ways off?
Yep. So we've had that happen on a few fish in the Swanee River. So they'd be in, quite a ways up the river, 20 miles up the river, and they'll all of a sudden be at East Pass at the mouth of the river. And so, do they take advantage of a high flow events? If there's a lot of rain, do they get flushed out, or, exactly what's happening? Great questions that we hope to address with this project.
And when you do see them push up, is it like 1 mile inland, or we're talking 5 miles, 10 miles, 15 miles? Like what would be, obviously it's going to be varied, but is there like a range that's like the average?
Well, we've got listening stations up and down the coast, and we found them, 20 to 30 miles inland. River miles, rivers wind, so definitely, they can really move pretty far up that river if they want to. And maybe I guess another thing I should mention is that in addition to warm water associated with the springs, is there occasionally some warm water that's deeper. So deeper spots, maybe some good fishing holes too. So they occasionally will like to hang out in those deep drop-offs in the wintertime.
Cool. Any specific type of structure? Anything shocking you besides, obvious mangrove trees?
Trees, yeah. Those drop-offs, I think they like to stack up on the edge of drop-offs, and some of the other rivers, I've heard of folks trolling big plugs up and down the river, and being successful with that tactic.
Too cool. If you're going to fish Cedar Key right now, beginning of springtime, where are you fishing? What you don't have to give your GPS spot. What kind of area, what kind of depth for Snook, knowing what you know?
I want the GPS spot.
We'll do that offline. We'll do that.
That's what I'm waiting for.
For insider zone.
Insider zone. Yeah. So if I were to go out right now, I would be fishing near the mouth of the Swanee River, shallow oyster reefs, drop-offs, like I mentioned. I think this is my hypothesis. I don't know this for a fact, but I think this time of year you can still get some cold fronts coming through. I think they like to stage near the mouths of these rivers, and in case there's another cold front that comes through, they can hightail it back up into the river. And I've heard some other folks say that they think manatees kind of do the same thing.
That's pretty cool. Anything else, Tony, Luke? Just on?
I did want to ask, I think you had mentioned, I don't know if we were off record or now, that you felt that there were two different schools or two different pods, like predominant, groups or congregations of snook. And you said some that hang out around the mouth and some that hang out in river. And every now and again, one from each of the families or bundles or schools will mingle with each of the other school. Can you explain why you think that there's two separate schools, why they all wouldn't do the same thing inherently if they're all in the same general area? What do you guys have any thoughts on really what makes them different?
So that's, those are just some initial observations that we've made. So some preliminary findings, and that's based on a couple of things. The tag data one, we see the random one moving up and down. Otherwise, seem to be, kind of two distinct groups, I guess. I wouldn't call them populations, but groups. The other thing is the snook around the springs and the snook on the coast, they kind of look a little different. The ones along the coast are kind of deeper bodied. They're thicker, and the ones up in the springs are a little thinner. That they could be related to their diet. I don't know, but maybe some anecdotal evidence that maybe these are two different groups with occasional mixing. But that's something again that hopefully we can iron out in the future and keep studying these snook and learn what's going on.
It's too cool. So, what are the big goals for this year, 2021? What do you guys? When does this wrap up? How long of a study is this? What's next?
Yeah, so we're looking at bringing on a student to keep working on this data and more tags. We're going to try to keep putting out tags every year. The snook are around here. We think they live about 12 years or so we can get some data on it for the life of the fish. So in addition to the ones we have out, we hope to keep putting more fish out that are tagged. Keep getting these movement patterns over multiple years, multiple winters. Every winter it seems to be a little different. Last year was kind of a mild winter, I guess. This winter maybe was a little colder, maybe a little bit. So that's one major goal. We got a group working on food habits around Cedar Key. Let's see what else. We have a project with the Duke Energy Foundation, working with Eric Latimer down there. In the old Crystal River nuclear plant. They've got a long, straight canal. We've tagged some fish out there. We got receivers up and down that canal. So, you think about the Swanee River, it's a big system. This one's 3 miles long. So we hope to learn more in that study about what are the temperature triggers? Do they run out and then come back? And at what temperatures does that happen? So we got those out back in January, and receivers are out there listening for us right now.
Too cool.
Awesome. So those receivers, the items in the tags that in the fish, those will last 10 plus years. Like those will last the actual lifespan of a.
Well, probably not.
Any idea?
We're probably looking at about 5 years.
Wow.
On the tags. So if anybody out there catches a fish that has, in addition to the acoustic tag that we have, we put a dart tag in the back, so it's got a phone number you can call. And those tags are about $250 a piece. The receivers are about $2,500 a piece. So if you catch a fish, and you keep it legally, of course, but it has that tag in it, call us and let you know. Hey, dig that carcass up and. Get our tag back. We can put in a different fish.
And so for that, does it have your number? I assume it has your number on the tag, on the tag on the top. And I assume you probably want to call either way. Like if somebody does catch it, just call, and if it's released, just say, hey, it was caught at this certain time and this day and location.
Yeah, right. We'll give you a t-shirt.
Nice.
Yeah, a buddy of mine that I was fishing with caught a redfish over in Sebastian Inlet and had a tag, and we were so pumped up. And we were out waiting. I actually had to get a knife, and we didn't have anything to write with, so I etched the number in a cardboard little package of fish lures. And we're so pumped up, called, and turns out it was caught like 2 or 3 months before, like 50 yards, like maybe 500 yards away. So we were like, man, this thing probably came from the other side of the state, and it was like 500 yards away. But that data is just amazing. Like, it's really it's always fascinating to me to be able to.
It is, and so I love to duck hunt too. That's one of my number one hobbies is duck hunting. I don't get to do it enough in Florida, but I shot a wood duck once that had a band on it, and it was banded just 10 miles up the road.
Yeah, it's just cool that that's being done. I can't wait to hear what you guys learn over time on where these fish move, and to see if that gradual shift north keeps happening. That's really is fascinating.
Yeah, it is. And, maybe there's some listeners up there in the Panhandle excited to hear this. I don't know. Snook moving in. I can tell you that when I moved to Cedar Key in 2016, all the fishing guides mostly targeted redfish and trout. And over the past year or two, they've started fishing for snook. So they've caught on, and, it's the new game in town.
That's too cool. Yeah, and clearly, if there's been even some small ones caught up in South Carolina, that means they're in Georgia. I know that I keep hearing more and more caught in Jacksonville, which used to never happen. So it's cool. Where can we learn more? Like, where are you guys publishing this data? Where do you guys do you have a website open for the public or what?
Yeah. Take a look at the UF-IFAS Nature Coast Biological Station website. We have a Facebook page, a Twitter page, Instagram, all that good stuff. So
what do we look up again?
UF-IFAS Nature Coast Biological Station. That's in Cedar Key, Florida.
It's a mouthful, dude.
It is. Our logo is a redfish tail, so you'll recognize it.
We like you already. Cool. Yeah, we'll put all the links in the show notes. And so it sounds like you have some students too. For those listening, I know we get a lot of parents are asking about, hey, internships, and my son or daughter really loves, marine biology or marine life, or wants to go fishing, whatever it is. How do they reach out on that?
Yeah. So again, our social media is a good way that we try to get our news across. We do an internship program for college students. So that our applications just closed for this summer, but check it out. Keep an eye on it. Bookmark it. Come back next year, and hopefully we'll have more internships. So
perfect. Maybe we'll get little Carlin in there one day.
Yeah, he'd be a good fit.
Yeah,
all over that. That's
got to start them early.
That's right.
I get my daughter out as much as I can. I have a small aluminum boat, get her out fishing. And it doesn't matter what we catch. Pinfish, little puffers, lizards, whatever. She loves it. She thinks it's the best thing ever.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Just some live bait will keep most kids happy for hours.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. Cool. Well, Charles, this has been fun, man. Super interested in hearing more about this, and we'll continue to track it ourselves. And so we'll put links in the show notes. It's saltstrong.com/podcast. And if you guys are catching any snook up north, anywhere north of you guys, really, I'm always fascinated in that. So definitely post that in our insider group or the Facebook group. It's cool to see these snook, one growing and two expanding. So it'll be interesting. When do they make the next vote on the Gulf Coast side of things for opening snook back up? Do you guys know?
Pretty soon. I thought it was May.
Yeah, I think it's coming up. So, Well, we'll update on that as we know more. But guys, it's been fun. Appreciate it. And we will talk to everybody on the next episode. We out. Peace.
'Cause fishing, it's in my soul. It was